right, I think let's go ahead and get started now. So welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Josh Amster. I'm the VP of Sales here at StartEngine. And today we're going to be having a somewhat of a fireside-like chat with the CEO, founder, and director of Flower Turbines, Dr. Daniel Farb. And so Flower Turbines is an offering on the StartEngine platform. They're taking advantage of regulation crowdfunding, Reg CF for short. And they've so far raised over $700,000 from over 1,000 investors. So we're going to have an opportunity to hear from Daniel. He's going to have, I'm going to ask him some questions around the business. But before we do get started with that, I'd like Daniel to introduce himself. So Daniel, would you please introduce yourself to the webinar?
Well, hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Farb, and I am somebody who's been pretty dedicated for the last 10 to 15 years to discovering ways to scientifically make renewable energy a much bigger force in the world than it is. There's a lot of talk now about renewable energy and the costs, and the whole idea is if you make things more efficient, you make them better, that it's not so much an issue of costs, but actually you can make costs go down by using renewable energy. So that's the idea. I started the idea because I wanted to combine aerodynamic science and advances in it with something beautiful. So I always had the idea of having turbines that look like flowers. And it turns out that some of the engineering simulations that we did at the very beginning showed certain ways of solving the problem of making small wind turbines efficient that could be similar to a flower shape. And I've always enjoyed art. I actually sort of grew up in a museum in New York City. My mother was a museum director when I grew up. So I like the idea of combining aesthetics with a product. And so I did a lot of development work, mostly in Israel, with some of the top engineers in certain areas of the world, in order to simulate, patent, build, test, and redo the process. So over a couple of years, we've done that process also in conjunction with Stony Brook University in New York. And now we're ready to commercialize. And thanks to the people who've been investing throughout the past year in StartEngine, we've really made a lot of progress. We've brought some new patents into play, been able to fix up the engineering, and to start with new markets. So we're really moving ahead. If you want to read more about my bio, you can go to the website where we're fundraising. But I think this is what's important to you, is I'm somebody who's dedicated to really solving the problems of renewable energy, and specifically here to solving the problems of how to make small wind one of the biggest world industries.
Great. So awesome, Daniel. Thank you for that. And just as a reminder to the people in attendance today, if you do have questions for Daniel, please make sure to ask those questions. There's a feature here on your screen that you should be able to submit a question. We will be getting to those questions most likely at the end of our conversation here. If I see some that are really relevant to the topic, I may bring those in, but please do submit your questions because we will have time at the end to go over some of those. So Daniel, thank you again for being here and for the very brief overview of things. Can you share with us a little bit as to kind of the stage of development regarding this turbine? Kind of where are you guys in that process?
So right now we've built two pre-manufacturing models of the latest model, latest technology. We built those in Rotterdam, where I am right now, by the way. And we are now engaging with manufacturers in several different countries to make sure we have worldwide coverage. And we're getting estimates and going back and forth with some in the United States, in the Netherlands, in Israel, Eastern Europe, so far. And at some point in the future, I hope also China.
Very cool. And so what is the mission or the vision of Flower Turbines?
The vision is that small wind turbines have always been a nice thing, but they've never really made it in terms of the scale that large wind, large solar, and small solar have made it. And I think the primary reasons are that nobody before me has solved the problem of how to make noiseless or low noise turbines plus efficient turbines at the same time. Usually they don't go together because there's a lift effect, like with an airplane, that creates turbulence and makes noise. So that's number one. So we've solved that problem. Number two is that there's the problem that if you can't put turbines close together, which you can't in general, then it's much less cost effective. It doesn't use space as well. One of the good things about solar is you put solar panels right next to each other. So what I've changed, I patented, and it's already granted in the United States and China, is a patent that describes a formula for how you place these types of turbines in such a way so that they actually make their neighbors perform better. And that's a game changer because now we can make farms of small wind turbines.
Wow. And so you did mention that you are in the Netherlands, is that right? What are you doing there? Or what have you been, how long have you been there and what are you there for?
So it started because I applied for the company to be in an accelerator called Port Excel Rotterdam. They screen 1,000 companies and they end up picking around 20. So Flower Turbines is one of the 20. And part of the deal is that we set up a subsidiary company in the Netherlands, and they help us get to market and make a small investment and help us get into the EU market, contacts, everything. So it's gone spectacularly well. At the end of the program, I think it was in May or June, we had 5 contracts signed, and we're busy working on others. And strategically speaking for the company, one of the best starting markets is the Netherlands and the North Sea adjacent area of Europe, because it has some basic essentials that we really need to get the company moving ahead. And those are high wind, it's a very windy area, high price of electricity, and a desire to make the transition to clean energy. You put those all together, everybody is interested in what we're doing. They appreciate the technology. We're getting contracts, and I came for a 2-week period here to help move things along. Today we had a meeting with a projects company in the Netherlands, identified a number of areas of the Netherlands where we can make projects, and they're planning on a project with us also in a certain area of the Netherlands. They already have the land ready. Just a question of getting permits, getting the feed-in tariff, a number of things like that. But it could lead to a total of maybe 50 turbines on their own property. So that's before going into other properties and making other projects. So that's an example of the kind of interest and the kind of reception that we've been getting here. Also on Friday, we went to visit a company that specializes in composites manufacturing, and we're planning to make, at least locally for the Netherlands and maybe for Europe and maybe even to export to the US, I don't know yet, a composites version. So we're talking about the details of that. So we're getting a lot of interest, a lot of growth potential. And I think that what everyone wants to see is that we identify a few markets in which there's a really big potential. We really move ahead with that. And then one market feeds into the other. Oh, so you're successful in the Netherlands? Ah, I see, that's great. People feel you'll be successful somewhere else. So that's one starting market. I have my eyes on certain markets in the United States as well. That's just lagging a little bit, but we're working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's a kind of a good segue. We talked a little bit about where you are now with regard to the technology. I imagine there's a lot of things going on here with patents as well. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit about, you know, if you filed for certain patents, Have you received certain patents? What does that look like?
So we've already received several important patents, some on improving the efficiency of small wind turbines, and the cluster effect patent, which has been granted in both China and the US, major markets. And our last examination in Europe indicated that it's likely that we'll be granted that in Europe as well. So those are three major markets in which we would have the cluster effect patent patented. So I think that's going very well. There are other markets, of course, and other patents, but that's one of the crucial ones. So that's going really well, and it really confirms what I'm saying, that we're really trying to revolutionize an industry and make it from a nice and growing industry to a industry that's growing quickly and becoming global and becoming huge. And that's what we all want to accomplish here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And with the market specifically, is there one that you're starting with? And, what's the next market from there? Or where are you at on what markets you're going to tackle?
So the Netherlands, as I mentioned, and our plan is to move along the rim of Northern Europe, Belgium, Germany. By the way, this week already got like a idea from a potential partner for a place where we could set up our first demo wind farm in Germany, Denmark, that area, trying to go along that very windy periphery of Northern Europe. But other things come up. So, for example, from being here and being in the Port Excel program, we're getting contacts with a lot of other ports around the world, and those ports are helping us. And we're getting referrals and so forth. So there's a pipeline. Everything takes time. It's not like an internet kind of business where you can go viral in a day or two and get millions of people coming to your website. But it's very good progress, and I think that once we, get our turbines up and running and so forth, that it's really going to take off. In the United States, there are two markets I very much have my eyes on. One is Long Island, which has the highest cost of energy in the mainland United States, and Hawaii, which has a very high price of energy, and both are windy areas. They're islands. So there's wind from all sides. And a piece of breaking news, I didn't even have a chance to announce it yet on the website, is that is that Flower Turbines was accepted into a program called Launch Alaska, which helps companies get into the market in Alaska. So you may think, well, way over there, what's going to happen? Well, Alaska is a huge state. Lots of places around Alaska where rural communities are dependent on diesel fuel, which is very expensive, has to be flown in. And there are a lot of windy areas along the coast. So it's actually a very nice niche market. So that's something new that we can add to our list of priority markets. But then there's so many places in the United States where the wind is good. The whole Midwest is wonderful, but the price of electricity is lower there. So it's a little bit more of a competition, but there are lots of great locations all around the US.
Got it. Yep, that makes sense. And so I want to move in a little bit to the manufacturing discussion, just because we also do have a few questions coming in regarding manufacturing. So I guess the first question here, actually from Gary, is where are the turbines produced?
So our production, we've produced in the past in a few locations, in Israel, Eastern Europe, and India. Right now, I'm looking that we should be producing in or near the major market areas. So Netherlands, we're already getting started. Israel would be for Israel and to supply Western Europe, possibly, and in the United States. So what's happening in the United States is that I hired, number one, some representatives from the state of New York to try to find locations in New York. Number two is I hired, and by the way, part of this is thanks to the people who already invested, that we have the money to do this. some manufacturing consultants who are looking for the best locations to establish a supply chain in the US. And another piece of breaking news, on Sunday, I had a discussion with a group of companies that's very involved in renewable energy about the possibility of licensing or producing, somehow being involved in distributing, manufacturing and distributing the flower turbines in the United States and producing them. The company they want to introduce me to is in Minnesota. So all of these things are happening. We're trying to look at the best location in terms of price, quality, and logistics. So it's we're actively looking for the latest that we can.
Mm-hmm. And how quickly, well, kind of a two-part question, how quickly can you build a turbine, and then what size are these units that you're selling?
So let's maybe start with the size. We're offering 4 sizes. The 2 largest sizes are intended to be more commercial, like for commercial installations, parking lots, malls, things like that, because they're meant to be larger producers. We have a size that's 2.7 meters high. That's around 7 feet. If you look at the picture in StartEngine, the front picture, that's us in a factory in Rotterdam where we made the demo models. That's more what I see is for residential. And then there's what I call a mini turbine, which is about 3 feet high, which is intended for small uses. It could be for a home, but I'm intending it more like for people who go on sailboats and need batteries charged, or camping trips. You don't want to turn on the car engine, and if you have a wind, you can use it for that. And would come with a charge controller. We could even maybe plug in a solar cell as well. So those are the 4 sizes, and we're looking to get started with all of them. I'll just go through some of the challenges. Is that we are thinking of producing a version both in aluminum and blades and fiberglass blades. Fiberglass can withstand more extreme conditions, but the aluminum would be lighter and cheaper, because once we start doing molds and stamping it like you make cars, the price will come down substantially. So there are a lot of options. We're looking into all of them. All of them are going to have high quality bearings. We're building them, so they're going to last for 25 to 40 years. So make a good long-term investment. There are a lot of options, but basically we are trying to set up supply chains in each of the regions that we're working in.
And if you don't mind sharing, what does it cost you to make? I know there's different sizes of the turbines, and then what also are you selling the turbines for?
So the largest size, assuming basic colors and assuming basic electronics, comes in several kilowatts available, depending upon your region. It might be better if you have a 2 kilowatt or a 5 kilowatt. A 2 kilowatt would be $7,500. A 3 kilowatt would be $10,500, and a 5 kilowatt would be $14,000. And then the residential version, which I imagine a lot of you in the audience would probably be interested in for your homes, would be $2,500 each, and the standard would be a 500-watt generator.
Got it. And then can you talk a little bit about kind of your sales plan and who you're targeting with sales? Obviously, it sounds like consumers and can purchase these turbines for their homes and things like that. But is that the main focus of direct to consumer sales pipeline, or are you more focused more on the commercial side of things?
So the biggest market is the commercial market. So that is one that we're going after, but it's also a little bit slower. To get a corporation to make a buying decision takes time. I, have reached out to a number of these companies, and it, it takes time to get through their system and their approvals. One very large U.S. corporation I met one of their top executives, and then he referred me to their head of their real estate operations so that he could figure out which places might be good. We had a conversation, and now he's compiling a list for me of their locations in different states where we could do the first one. So it takes time. And whereas for a home, people can make a buying decision much faster. But the cluster effect applies to both, because it's just like one solar panel can't run a home, one wind turbine of a small kind can't run a home either. So you need to put a few. So the cluster effect is also important for homes as well. But I really see the biggest market as going after the Walmarts of this world, the big corporations that have big parking lots, big roofs, malls, etc. And those are the ones that we think we're going to make the biggest profit on eventually.
Right. And can you talk about maybe a little bit of the accomplishments of the company thus far, whether it be sales or things of that nature over the past year that you can point to?
So I would say we've been doing the best in the Netherlands, as I mentioned, 5 contracts. And by the way, we just signed a letter of intent for another 30 turbines at another location in the Netherlands. So that is moving along very well in terms of sales. As I said, I'm engaging with a lot of places in the United States. There are other places around the world where I've gotten requests for sales, letters of intent, but it's mainly been the Netherlands, and people are starting to buy from our website in the US. So, and that's been without very much promotion of it. And to reserve turbines, I think that once this takes off, it's going to be very hot. It'll be very good for those people who've put a deposit down and gotten online. They'll be able to get theirs first. I think it'll be the kind of thing you're going to be proud of to own, not only because you're doing something for the planet, but it's going to be cost effective, and it's going to be a beautiful enhancement of your home. I'd say that most of the accomplishments this past year, though, in addition to what we've done at Port Excel, have been preparatory. They've been going over the engineering, the patents, business development. We've spent a lot of time trying to get some things started in China. It hasn't worked out yet. It's not an easy place to do business in many ways, but it's an important market. And the Chinese government has issued a directive to encourage small wind in China. And so I've gotten a lot of requests that, we can be joint venture partners, always, of course, with them being the majority partner, and manufacture for you in China. So you have to be careful about who you partner with anywhere, but there especially. So we came close to a deal. We had to call it off when the company that was involved said that we can only do a deal if every financial decision is approved by the Communist Party. So that wasn't exactly something that I was interested in. So, it's like any country, you have to find the right people, the right way to get in. I put some time into it. I've made contacts. I've made contacts with potential investors. I'm still working at that one, but I think the United States, I'm getting offers, Europe, offers, and sales. So things are moving along in that sense too.
Great. That's great. And then let's talk a little bit about, obviously you're raising money. So what are you planning to do with the funding?
So as I mentioned, we've made a lot of progress right now. I think we're at the tipping point where if we had no more money, we could be a successful company, but it would take longer for us to scale up. if we had more money now, where it would go would be into molds and getting more production started, so that we would be able to have higher volume and bring down the cost and our margin, of course, through the higher volume. We'd be able, now, one of the other key things that's related to that, having more money, is I want to move into the model from just making sales to selling electricity. And for that, we need financing. We need to put up the capital in order to sell the electricity at a discount to a customer. But that's what's done throughout the United States with solar, and it's a very good model, but we have to get to that point. And to get to that point, we need more operating projects, and we may have to finance the first ourselves without a bank. So that is something that if we had another couple of $100,000 in the bank right now, there are these projects where we could go and say, you don't have to put money down, we'll finance it, we'll sell you electricity, and then we'd be moving into the market faster. So all these things would enable us to scale up. We have added some personnel, a technician and a project manager in the Netherlands, because we're scaling up already. We're getting more requests than we could handle. And so we've added people to help us handle those. But there's always a lag between when you get the requests and then you get the contract, and then when you get the permit, and then when you actually get it out there. So the money would help us make that transition. It would also help us with matching grants. And it's nice to get free money from governments. And having that extra money around to match them can make a big difference in our profitability at an early stage. So we're doing well, and we have money in the bank now, thanks to all of our investors. Thank you if you're out there today. You've really made a difference, but we can use more, and we would use it to accelerate our growth.
Great. And tell us a little bit about your team, the size of your team, who kind of are on the executive level, and then, maybe a rundown through the different departments and things of that nature.
So we have a few people, first of all, that have done some work and are interested in joining, but they can't leave their current employment until we have something secure to offer them. And that means having more money available. So we have among them some people, MBAs, who have had excellent experience in utilities, in real estate, which is one of our major markets, and entrepreneurship, project management. So we have some really good people. Currently, we have engineers. And as I mentioned, we have an association with Stony Brook University. We've been using engineering from them. We also have some engineers of our own that have been working part to full-time on this. And then we have some people in the EU. We have an EU director who's full-time. And we now have brought on a technician who's worked for an engineering firm previously in Rotterdam, and somebody who's going to be doing project management for us. So, when you're a startup, you want to wait to make a full commitment to somebody until you're sure you have the money for it. So right now, most people are doing work for us part-time or on contract. And as we get more funds and we have a steadier cash flow, then I've identified some people that we can bring on more full-time. But if a deal goes through with this company that approached me about handling manufacturing distribution in the United States, there presumably would be the means to pull together a whole team now.
Gotcha. And so I want to move into a little bit more of a high-level conversation around this space and the potential for how big this may be. I think one question that I'm curious to hear your opinion on is, whether you think that energy is is the next industrial revolution. I imagine you're going to be pretty passionate about this topic. How big do you see this being?
So let's say the closest model is photovoltaic solar. That is now getting close to being a billion, it's huge industry. I think the sales each year are large. I think the industry itself has already reached over $100 billion. I'm not familiar with the latest statistics. And I would say that small wind is the equivalent, but nobody has yet cracked the code like we have in terms of the science that's involved. And the design too is important because people want something they can look at and enjoy, of the science that makes it possible. So I see us as growing in the growth model of solar. Obviously, we won't grow as fast as solar in a place like New Mexico, but we'll grow faster than them in places like the northern United States. So it's a different geographical area, but there's no reason that if we don't play our cards right, and if we have the right financing to keep us growing, that in maybe 5 years, we could be on our way to be a $100 billion company. And I think the potential for both types of energy is $1 trillion globally. And that's what I'm aiming for. And, you know, I always believe in aiming high. And if you don't quite make it, so, okay, so we only did a $500 billion industry. Not bad. So,
not bad at all.
I'm aiming big. I think we have the technology to do it. I think we're getting a start in the right direction. It's a combination of hard work, funding, and just persistence in order to get there. It's a huge market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then specifically here in the United States, we have a question here from Martha asking is the current political climate in the U.S. slowing things down with new energy projects, or what are you experiencing as someone that's in this space?
So it's interesting. What I'm experiencing is, well, let me first say, you know, I grew up in the United States, and so I know the culture there, and we all know that there's a certain culture. I want the cheapest thing possible. I don't care if I'm burning a lot to get there. And that's unfortunate. And I think it's unfortunate, I don't want to get into politics, but one of the problems of the current administration in Washington is that they don't appreciate the value of renewable energy. Now, part of that, again, to be fair, is that there have been some very extreme ideas about how far you go and how you implement renewable energy. I would say that there is, on the other hand, there are many individuals and many states that are trying to make a big impact in renewable energy. I would say that the middle ground I'm aiming for is dedication to the renewable energy path, but trying to do it in a cost-effective way. In other words, by making better science, more efficiency, that it doesn't get to the point where we're reliant on taxpayer dollars, like frankly solar was for many years, in order to get to market. That we can make a case for cost-effective energy and helping the consumer save money by just doing a good job at what we're doing. So that's my aim. I will say that it is unfortunate that the United States doesn't have as big a vision as Europe and China do in terms of reaching a carbon-free economy. In Europe, they're very strong about that. And unfortunately, it may take another crisis, another boom and bust in energy supply in the United States in order for that to happen. But when we're not working on making that transition, A, it's bad for the planet. In my opinion, I hold with those that we are altering the climate. And B, we're not thinking about where the future industries are going. And the future industries are in sustainability, sustainable energy, circular economy, which means recycling things as much as possible. And we need to have more of a vision in the United States of accomplishing it. But there are 300+ million people in the United States, and a lot of those people who themselves want to do something about it. So maybe they'll play a role in that.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see wind in the U.S. renewable market?
So I see it as being a substantial presence. Well, let's say large wind is already the fastest growing globally and in the United States of any renewable energy. It also is the cheapest of all the renewable energy, aside from hydro, which is traditionally very cheap and very clean. But I can tell you that it's hard to get hydro projects moving in the United States the way the regulations are. And by the way, though, one of the flip sides of the current administration is they've been decreasing regulations, so it's been easier to get certain kinds of projects done than it was in the past. Wind is a major force. There's lots of wind in the United States. There are the coasts, the mountains, and the Midwest. All of these areas have huge populations. And the role of small wind would be that we can reduce the cost of energy at the point of use for many houses and companies throughout the country. Because, again, take the case of Long Island. If your electricity is 25 cents a kilowatt hour, and we can sell you electricity by putting wind turbines on your home, or you're buying them, whatever, for 10, 15, 20 cents per kilowatt hour, you're making money, you're doing well. And so there's a very big potential in lots of these areas. And then as we bring down our costs, we become competitive in more and more regions of the country.
And this kind of relates well to Marlon's question here, asking about how about a stronger wind? I live in a designated area for wind energy. At what speed is it recommended to use?
So if you live in an area of 5 to 6 meters per second average, and I guess that's around 10 to 12 miles per hour, you're going to do well with a wind turbine. And I think that in a few years, I think we'll be able to sell them in 4.5 meters per second, and then 4 meters per second. But there's less energy as you get lower. So it's a combination of the price and how much wind you have.
Gotcha. And David also here has a question asking, what type of life cycle testing has occurred and what type of results have you experienced thus far?
So we've had some earlier versions that have been running for like 8 or 9 years without any maintenance. So that's it. And nowadays you have to do a lot of your life cycle testing through computer programs, engineering programs, and we are going to. And one of the things that we would do when we have more money is we're going to send some out for third-party certification. And it's very expensive, but I think it's important, but it's very expensive. We definitely need to raise more money in order to get that process underway. But we are planning to do it. We have there's a third-party site we're thinking of using called WindTest that has one testing location in Iowa, where we'd be exposed to high winds a lot, and one in northern Germany, where they're moderate to high winds. So that's part of what we would do. I'll tell you the most important part of the turbines is the bearings, because that bears the stress. And our engineer did a calculation that with putting in 2 sets of quality bearings, that the lifetime of them is going to be no less than 25 years. So, part of this is just making the extra little investment of cost up front, and you can deliver a product that's going to be doing very well with a long life cycle.
Mm-hmm. And Peter here asks, how do you validate existing designs and test new ideas? I.e., do you rely on calculations or necessarily build prototypes that are then tested?
So we do both. everything starts nowadays with what's called computational fluid dynamics, which is basically simulation of the flow around different shapes. And that's an important part of what we're doing. Since then, we've done validations. For example, you'll see, I think on our own website, flowerturbines.com, I forget if we put it up. I think we put it up also on StartEngine Flower Turbines investment site, is some data that we took from long-term, mostly in Israel where the winds are low, that shows our turbine starting to turn at 1.2 meters per second. That we had a lot of data on. That's very established. Our newest version is going to be a little more efficient than that one, but most turbines start at 3 meters per second. So we know that we're doing much better than other turbines in areas where we have a lot of data. We need more data in higher wind speed areas, and we're going to get it, but it takes time and money, to get a full answer to your question.
Yeah, and I think maybe you touched on this just now, but Frank's question was, are the turbines stationary or do they swivel to catch the wind from any direction?
So because they're vertical axis and they go like this, they can pick up wind from any direction. And that's one of the advantages of vertical axis type turbines. And I've seen it myself, it works perfectly fine. Any direction the wind changes from to, it starts the turbine.
Great. And Jeremy asked the question of, how does the output that is generated compare to solar? Will these produce electricity that will go into local grids, or will it be attached to a storage battery that can be stored and used for private use to keep at home or a business off the grid completely?
So there are really two questions there. Let's start with how it relates to solar. So it all depends what your resource is. If you're in a very sunny area that's not windy, go with solar. If you're in a windy area that's not sunny, go with wind. If you're in an in-between area, use both. Now, in a windy area, we did a calculation of the way things are in places like Massachusetts, Cape Cod area, Rotterdam. Basically, the area from 40 degrees latitude north in a windy area is that we get a slightly better return on investment from solar. But where we get a much higher return is if you look at the amount of energy produced per square foot. There it's about 3 times higher than solar. So what that tells you is if you're in a windy area and you have a limited amount of space, your first choice should be wind. Then, because the wind is used up, you may have just one, maybe 2 rows, but usually just 1 row of wind. Then you can use solar for the rest of your roof, rest of your property, parking lot, whatever it is. If it's a house with a slanted roof, the solar could go on the sides and the wind turbines could go in different areas, maybe at the top. So they're different, they're synergistic, but in windy areas, there are a lot of advantages to wind over solar. And by the way, the reason for that is that wind is more efficient, our wind at least, not every wind turbine, is more efficient than solar, and it's vertical rather than horizontal.
Mm-hmm. And how about situations of extreme high winds? How are the turbines, protected during these times?
So we're building them to survive with a margin of error, a small hurricane wind. I don't recommend you put them in the path of Hurricane Dorian, but there you need an insurance policy and your house may not stand. So, don't worry about your wind turbine in that case. But if we're talking about even hurricanes, small hurricanes, they're made to withstand that. Then the rest is if you've attached them firmly enough to the ground, and that's the work of the local civil engineer who gets the permit. But the turbines themselves are made to last 35 meters per second, which is 80 to 100 miles per hour with a margin of safety.
Great. And Dale asks, what is the lowest average wind speed where a turbine is still economically viable to install?
So it depends on your price, but I've suggested that in general, it should be 5 to 6 meters per second. If you have high-priced electricity like Hawaii, but Hawaii is good wind anyway, you could do with lower production of wind from the turbine. But in general, 5 to 6 meters per second.
Great. And John asked here, can you talk a bit more about small wind? What's your vision of the community of 2025 or even 2030?
So I see there's a trend in the US and around the world of more and more people being able to produce their own electricity. I think it's great. I think it's like democratized energy. It means also that we're less dependent on huge grids. I was at a conference a few weeks ago at the National Renewable Energy Lab. They talked a lot about cyber threats to the US grid. It's happening. There are constant attempts to infiltrate it. And it's nice to have your own source of energy. If you can take yourself off the grid, if you live in a windy or a sunny area, that's great because it decreases the load on the grid and it gives you a kind of independence. I think we're going to see more independence. We're going to see more renewable energy on the grid. We're going to see microgrids, which means, let's say, groups, communities, co-ops, where they're going to make a grid for a certain town, a certain county, whatever. I think those trends are very strong towards the decentralization of energy. I also think one of the trends we're going to see is once electric cars take over more and more of the market, you're going to see a sudden uptick in demand for electricity because a lot of that fossil fuel is going to shift to electricity. And then you're going to see a lot of people really want to get their own solar and wind because the prices may shoot up at that time.
Makes sense. And then Charles here asked, how much noise should a homeowner expect to hear in a residential application?
So we had an earlier version of the turbines officially measured. And what it showed is that they were actually less than the noise of the wind. And part of that is us making them so that they have very low vortices, very low vibration, very low wind, very low, not wind, very low noise. So I don't think that would be an issue at all. You hear more from the rustling of the leaves in the trees nearby than you would from the turbines.
Great. And Tommy here has a question of, do you see this product being manufactured at any time in the United States and then marketed outside of the continental USA?
So we spent a lot of time talking about that earlier. Maybe he didn't hear that. But the new question is, if we see it exporting, sure, we're going to see what is best for the company and what's best for the customers. We want to, if we start getting into mass production earlier in the United States, then we would export. So it's all a question of where we can get the best pricing. And I also see a world in which there are going to be more trade barriers coming up in different regions. So we might have to produce in different regions, but a lot will depend on the price and the volume, because the volume determines what the price is.
Great. One question here saying, can your units recharge batteries or propel a generator to produce the necessary power to provide adequate power for a home? So
yes, and that reminds me, the previous questioner had asked something like that. So for sure, it can be used with batteries. You can use wind through a battery charger that goes into a set of batteries that can then go into an inverter that powers your home, or you can use the energy to feed to the grid. You have a choice as to how you can go with that. And that's really up to you which configuration to follow. The advantage of being connected to the grid is that when you have excess energy, you can sell it. And when you're not making enough, you can buy it. So it's a choice, very often a personal choice, but it can be used both ways.
Another question here, why did you decide to use the StartEngine route for fundraising instead of a traditional VC route?
So I'll tell you on the negative side, venture capital is not venture capital. I think that if Steve Jobs were starting off now with Apple Computer, he might never have gotten funded because it's become safe capital, it's been coding capital as a general rule, not always. So that most of the capital is going into social media, all kinds of things like that. Very little into where you're making things. So that's number one. On the positive side, I did some searching around, and I happened to find that StartEngine was the most entrepreneur-friendly of the different platforms, and I've been very happy with that. And I like the idea of opening it up to many different people, because when I was originally starting to fundraise, before there was crowdfunding, my lawyer kept telling me, Daniel, you can't take money from all these people that are offering, I'd like to invest in you, I'd like to invest in you, because you only can take, I think it was some 30-something individuals in, and then you've run out. So until the crowdfunding regulation came along, all of these people that came up to me and said, I love what you're doing, I had to say, sorry, we have to save spots for people who only have a few $100,000 to invest. So this has been, I think, great for me. I think it's great for them. And I like the idea of having already 1,000 people who've invested and want to see us succeed. And it broadens our appeal and it broadens our audience. And I like seeing that. And some of you, by the way, have already, contacted me directly, or through our website, or whatever. And I enjoy hearing from you. Some of you out there, I don't know if you're on this webinar, have been trying to help with various things, getting projects, fundraising, that kind of thing. So I like this very much.
Very cool. And David here asked, after the bearings degrade 25 years or more, will it be easy and fairly economical to replace them?
You might have to pull the turbine apart, but you could replace them. One of the things that we're thinking of doing is looking at, we just had a discussion about that on Friday, is that by choosing the right oils and picking the right interval to replace the oil, they could last for 80 years. So a lot of it is the maintenance schedule and being organized enough that we could provide a maintenance service for the customers.
Great. Another question here from David. And I think we might touch on this a little bit earlier, but are you looking to partner with Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, et cetera, that can get you into the Chinese market, but can protect you with the modern port system?
So that certainly is true. I had just been in contact with with a group in Hong Kong, and I met somebody on Thursday from Taiwan. So I'm certainly considering that, but they can't protect you 100%. In other words, the head company may be more trustworthy, but you can't control what happens once you get into China that well. Nobody can, and even Chinese companies are worried about other Chinese companies. So it's a question of hopefully choosing the right partners. And I think if you make a successful business and you are in mass production before somebody else gets in, who's trying to compete with you, tries getting into mass production, and if you establish a reputation as making a quality product. I believe that the Chinese, as well as anybody else, want quality products if they're buying a wind turbine or anything else. And they're going to pay attention to them. They're going to want to make sure that it's genuine.
Great, and we have about another minute or two left here. Daniel, I wanted to kind of maybe open it up to you if there's anything last that you wanted to say to conclude the webinar today, but give you that floor.
So all I can say is that I'm very determined to bring my vision into effect of making a type of renewable energy widespread throughout the world. We have great ambitions for helping people, and we also would like to make a few $1 billion along the way. And hopefully you would all be part of that. I'll just say that as example of my dedication is that I have yet to take a salary from the company. I'm paying for expenses like traveling to be here in the Netherlands, but I'm watching the pennies, and I'm waiting personally to benefit from this until I've made sure that everybody else is benefiting from it. So that's my commitment, and my commitment to try and make it a success for all of you.
Terrific. So Daniel, again, thank you so much for the insight and all the information. I do want to repeat that Daniel and Flower Turbines are currently raising capital on StartEngine right now. So if you wanted to learn more about the company, the investment opportunity, the details on the business, you can go directly to their campaign page, which is startengine.com/flower-turbines. Again, it's startengine.com/flower-turbines. And there you will see all the information on the business, the investment opportunity, Daniel and his team, and you can kind of keep track of them and how things are going. So again, thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in, and we will hopefully see you all again very soon.
And thank you.
Okay. No problem. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.